Okay, what are the signs that Jesus is coming back soon? What are the signs that Jesus is coming back soon? Okay, so I got to get my folder out. I do have some notes that I kind of chicken scratched down here. And, okay, so what are the signs that Jesus is coming back soon? Before I actually get into this, what I want to do is I want to tell you some Bible passages that you would want to take a look at if you were going to determine what this answer is, okay? What are the signs? So my favorite Bible passage on this is Matthew chapter 24, okay? Matthew chapter 24. It's a part of what's known as the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus is giving a sermon on the Mount of Olives, and it's basically Jesus telling people what are the signs that he's going to come back, and he's a great authority on that idea. So I like what Jesus has to say on that. Another passage that's very similar from a different author's perspective is Mark chapter 13. You can find out a lot about Jesus from there. I also like 1 Thessalonians chapters 4 and 5. Those talk a lot about the return of Jesus. If you're going to look at Revelation, you know, the whole book is good, but I think in particular Revelation chapter 6 through 8 has some great ideas of signs of the times and the order of the things that are going to happen. And then in the Old Testament, you definitely want to check out Daniel chapter 7 through 9. These are the passages that I would say, if you're going to do a study on this, these are the places that I would go to first. It's certainly not exhaustive. It's just kind of your best of list. Now, if you want to know the signs that Jesus is coming soon, the Bible does actually say that Jesus is coming soon. Jesus says in Revelation, "Behold, I am coming soon." And you may take a look at your watch and go, hey, it's been like 2,000 years now, so, you know, that whole soon idea must be a relative concept. And if for God a day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years is like a day, it's really only been a couple days that Jesus has been gone. Actually, that doesn't float too well for so many people. But the idea is that even though in God's perspective, so if you think God's perspective is from the creation of the universe until now, it's been a long, long time, and the time since then is very little, even on Earth's timeline. But the truth of the matter is, nobody knows when Jesus is coming back, okay? Nobody knows when Jesus is coming back. And if you take a look in Matthew chapter 24 again, look at verse 36, it says, "No one knows the day or the hour when these things will happen, not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself. Only the Father knows." So we got to realize that even when Jesus was on planet Earth, he didn't know the date of his return. The angels didn't know the date of his return. Only the Father knew the date of his return, which should drive an awful lot of humility inside of us and an awful lot of skepticism if there's somebody who says, I know when Jesus is going to be coming back again. Because nobody knows the day or the hour. Only the Father knows. The other thing that you want to point out from Matthew 24, verse 44 is it says, "You must be ready all the time, for the Son of Man will come when least expected." So Jesus doesn't tell us the time because he wants us to always be ready that it might be happening now. There's another passage that says that the Son of Man will come like a thief in the night when nobody expects them to come. Now, my kids got an idea of this pretty early in their lives, of, you know, this whole idea. And when they started hearing speculation of when Jesus was going to come, like with the Y2K virus in the year 2000, or with the solar eclipse that's coming tomorrow, have you guys seen the internet stuff about this? Yeah, there's internet stuff, Jesus is coming, solar eclipse, all that type of stuff. And if people are predicting that it's going to happen, then it won't happen that day. Does that make sense? Because nobody knows it's going to happen when it's least expected. So if everybody's expecting it, it's not going to happen that day. So if everybody's going crazy about it, that is not the right day that it's going to be happening. Nobody knows the day or the hour. Second thing I want to point out is that there have been lots of theories over the years. So if you're trying to figure out, you know, what the exact time is, you just have to know that even the apostles themselves expected that Jesus was coming back in their lifetime. They didn't know the day or the hour, but they acted with urgency because they expected it was coming soon. In the year 500, Hippolytus, a Roman priest and theologian, predicted that Jesus would return at 500. About the year 1000, millennium fever swept the world as many clergy were in fear of the Antichrist and even sat out on hills as the time turned to the year 1000, believing Jesus was coming back. The Shakers, who came to America from England in 1774, were a millennial church. That is, they believed the millennium was at hand. The Shakers were fanatically anti-sex. Because why procreate more kids if they're just headed for the tribulation? Which also, I think, incidentally, explains why they were so great at making furniture. I mean, like, no distractions for them. Furniture. The date setting seemed to intensify when I was a kid. The first I remember of this was back in the 1970s. Maybe some of you old people can remember the 1970s. Hal Lindsey had this book, The Late Great Planet Earth. There was a series of movies called A Thief in the Night with all this scary stuff about, Jesus coming back again and the tribulation. There were prophecy conferences that were happening all over the country that were matching up historical moments with biblical prophecy. It was kind of in its heyday in the 70s. I was too young to really be able to take that in, but I remember it happening in the backdrop. And then in the 1980s, there was this book that came out called 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1988. Some of you might remember that one. It was not just in the United States. I was in the Philippines the summer of 1988, and that book was being read like wildfire in the Philippines as somebody had come up with 88 reasons they thought he was coming back then. And once again, Jesus did not come back in 1988. Just in case you were wondering, Jesus didn't come back then. In the 80s, I remember as well, like people would say, okay, our president is Ronald Wilson Reagan. Do you know how many letters there are in Ronald? 6. How many in Wilson? 6. How many in Reagan? 6. You know what that means. And then there was Gorbachev on the other side of the aisle, and he had that funky birthmark on his forehead. And I remember people saying, oh, the mark of the beast. There it is right there. And then you get into the year 2000, and some of you might remember Y2K hitting in the year 2000. All the computers were about to get knocked out of existence, and everything was going to go into chaos, and people were expecting Jesus might return at that point. Besides, 2,000 years from Abraham to Jesus, 2,000 years from Jesus until his second coming. It fits kind of nicely, so maybe that's when it's going to happen. But Jesus didn't come then as well. Truth of the matter is there are lots of theories that are out there, and I want to say be careful what you believe when the theories come to pass, because there have been lots of smart people that have tried to predict the date and missed it. Okay, number three is the Bible teaches us that we should live with urgency. Okay, live with urgency. I think that Jesus made it impossible for us to know the exact date or the hour so that we would always live as if it could be today or tomorrow or the next day. Because if he told his followers, it's going to be thousands of years before I get back again, you got plenty of time, what would they do? They'd just sleep in, leave it to the next generation, right? It's the same thing that we would do if we thought it was 1,000 years off. But Jesus wants us to live as though there is urgency in this world, as if we need to move forward. It says in the book of James, chapter 4, verse 14, I'll write this one down, James 4:14. It says this, how do you know what will happen tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while, and then it's gone. Hey, thanks for the encouragement, James. I am like a morning fog. But he's totally right. And then Ephesians 5:15 through 17 says this. So be careful how you live, not as fools, but as those who are wise. Make the most of every opportunity for doing good in these evil days. Don't act thoughtlessly, but try to understand what the Lord wants you to do. And these are just two of many passages that remind us of the shortness of our lives and the urgency with which we need to be living. I'll read one more too. This is Luke 21. Watch out, Don't let me find you living in careless ease and drunkenness and filled with the worries of this life. Don't let that day catch you unaware as in a trap, for that day will come upon everyone living on the earth. Keep a constant watch, and I pray that if possible, you may escape these horrors and stand before the Son of Man. Luke chapter 21, once again. The truth of the matter is, Jesus wants us to live with urgency and expectancy that he could come every moment. I think that's why he said, watch for the signs of the times, and behold, I am coming soon. Okay, next key point I want to point out is that your chance is now. Okay? Your chance is now. Why do I say that? Jesus very well might come back in our lifetime. I think there's a lot of signs that point back that it's a very real possibility that he could come back before we die. Now, the truth of the matter is, if Jesus comes back before you die, then the matter is urgent. You've only got a short time to be able to get the job done that Jesus has called you to. The other thing that's true, though, is that if Jesus doesn't come back until after you die, you still only have your lifetime to make an impact for him. I think that the way that time works is that once we die, boom, we're going to get straight translated to the time when Jesus returns to planet Earth and we'll all be judged together. I think that's what our experience is going to be like. So, in your experience, you are going to live your life, die, and at that moment, you'll be at the return of Christ. So the return of Christ either happens during your life or at the moment of your death. That's a little freaky, isn't it? The time is urgent, and Jesus wants to live as though our chance is right now. Now, I know people are asking this question. This is the real question that you were asking when you were asking about Jesus coming soon. And that is, when you compare what's happening in the Bible to what we see happening in current events, what's the evidence out there that, this seems like it's closer than it ever has been before? Let me give you a number of factors. Factor number one is that Israel has become a nation. The Bible predicted that many of the things that will happen in the end times will happen in conjunction with Israel as a nation. Israel was not a nation from the time of Jesus all the way until 1948. It was a part of a Roman Empire. It was the territory of somebody else. But it was never its own sovereign state until 1948. Most people don't realize this. So for 2,000 years, Bible scholars have been predicting that one day Israel is going to become a nation, and that's a precursor to the idea that Jesus is coming back again. That happened in 1948, less than a century ago. So some of these things that are going to be fulfilled weren't even possible until then, but now it is possible. The second thing, Jesus says that there's going to be an increase in earthquakes. Ask anybody in California about that one. Jesus said there are going to be wars and rumors of wars. Wars and rumors of wars. Look around the world. I mean, we got Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria. We got potentially Iran and North Korea and all their kinds of rumors that are floating around. Wars are becoming larger, more frequent, and affect more people than any time in world history, just like Jesus predicted. There will be territorial boundary disputes in the Middle East. That's happening all the time. Just keep reading the newspaper. The gospel of Jesus, it says, will be preached to all the world, and then the end will come. Well, with things like the internet, satellite broadcasts, it's possible for the first time in the world, literally for the gospel to be able to reach every person on planet Earth. And the number of unreached people groups and languages that can't understand Jesus is shrinking every single day. It's getting smaller and smaller. By many counts, the gospel of Jesus has made it around the world. And that had to happen before he could come again. The Bible talks about how everybody will be able to see Jesus when he comes back, which means you need instant worldwide communication. You look at cable news networks, you look at the internet, you look at what can be done through satellite broadcasts. Now, for this generation, is the first time in history when something happens on the planet, everybody on the planet can see that event simultaneously. The Bible says that in those last days, there will be an increase in knowledge, an increase in knowledge. And I don't know if you've seen the graphs that talk about the increase in knowledge over time, But from all the way the dawn of human history, the amount of human knowledge that was available was an extremely flat line until you get to about the Enlightenment era, at which time it started curving up. And then most recently, it's just begun to shoot up like a vertical line. The increase of knowledge is happening in our culture, just like Jesus predicted before he would return again. You'll have an increase, it says in the Bible, of the wickedness of the human race, an increase in immorality, an increase in materialism and self-centeredness. And all you have to do is read the news and interact with people to see that all of these things are happening in our culture. So when you ask, are the signs of the times that are written in the Scriptures taking place right now? In fact, they are. In fact, they are. And there are certain things that you would line up. You would go, oh, I would have never guessed that those things would be lining up. Some nations that are aligning with each other that you wouldn't have predicted would have aligned in the past are aligning. And it's pretty amazing what we see in the news and how it matches what's happening in the world today. So, if you ask yourself the question, if your chance is now, what are some key things you can do to prepare for this moment? Number one, I would encourage you to make sure you get yourself right with God. Make sure you get yourself right with God. If the end of the world could happen at any point, you need to make sure that if Jesus came tomorrow, your soul is square with him. That you've actually trusted his death on the cross, that you've believed in his resurrection, that you've bought into the idea that he could come back at any point. And when he does, he's coming back to take people home who have trusted in him, and people who have not trusted in him are going to be left behind. And they will regret it for the rest of their life and the rest of their existence. And I just want to implore you on behalf of Jesus that you would say yes to him, that you would in fact follow him, and that you would trust him with your life. What hangs in the balance for you has eternal implications. And so I want to invite you to say, hey, come be a part of the party. Jesus invites us to be a part of it, so I invite you as well. Second thing I'd encourage you to do is to begin reading the Bible systematically. Now, I'm talking about these passages here, but I'm really talking about the Bible as a whole, because those passages only make sense if you're a student of the Scriptures in general. If you understand the life of Christ and historical context and what was predicted beforehand, etc., all of those things are necessary in order to be able to have a good understanding about the return of Jesus. So begin studying the Bible as a whole and get to know it as well as you possibly can. Next thing I'd recommend is reading reliable books about God and the Bible and the end of the world. There's all kinds of them out there. You may be wondering, if you ask this question, what's my favorite starter book, my beginner book on prophecy and end times? My favorite one is called Bible Prophecy 101 by Bruce Bickle and Stan Jantz. They do a great balanced job of explaining the ins and outs of end times, a guide to the end times in plain language. They're both great scholars, so they've really done their homework, but at the same time, they're funny guys, and there's great sarcasm and engagement and pictures and stuff in here. So that's all really good, too. If you're new to this, this would be my introductory guide that I would recommend for you to be picking up. And then finally, my last recommendation is just to pray. Sometimes thinking about what's happening in the end times can be unsettling to our souls. When we think about the return of Jesus, the tribulation, the destruction of this world, the new heavens and the new earth coming, all of that can become overwhelming. But when you know God and you're finding yourself centered on him, when you're full of the power of the Holy Spirit and his love, when you're a person who's deep in prayer, none of this stuff is scary because you're on the side of the one who's going to win. You are on the victor's side, and you become with him on mission to be able to create a planet that would be able to receive him well and rescue people from the darkness and bring them into the light. And this is not only good news, this is really fun. Amen? So get to know God better. Yeah, you can give it up for God.